Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's Sunday, February 7th. Today is also Super Bowl Sunday. But before we get into the Super Bowl, we're going to have the Villanova basketball matchup against Georgetown. This is Villanova's home leg of the home and home with Georgetown, having played Georgetown in the first game of the Big East way back in December. What feels like could have been years ago, could have been just yesterday, depending on which way the wind's blowing. As always, we're going to kind of we'll talk about what's going on around the top of college basketball to start us off. We'll check in specifically on the Big East. We'll talk a little bit about Nova and their last game against St. John's on Wednesday night, even though some of us would probably rather I not. We're going to also check in on this Georgetown team, what we've seen since we saw them last, do a quick refresher on that game when we did see them last, and then get into what to watch for today. Bonus, I'll obviously have to break down the Super Bowl menu for here in the Notaro house. We'll save that for the very end before we get into tip-off at 1:30. So, again, super excited to have some Cats action to warm us up and get us ready for the big Super Bowl game later today. Before we get into anything Super Villanova specific, let's talk a little bit about what we saw around the top of college basketball, particularly since we saw you last, and the absolutely crazy Wednesday that we saw on February 3rd. This was, the narrative pushed by most members of college basketball media was that this was a really bad night to be a ranked team playing an unranked team. First and most obviously for this audience, Villanova lost a tough matchup at St. John's against a surging St. John's team. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Fifth-ranked Houston lost to East Carolina in, for a team like Houston playing in more of a mid-major conference. Their margin for error is obviously a lot smaller against opponents, so losing to sort of a no-name mid-conference, mid-tier opponent, not great, not a great look for them or for the top 10. Georgetown, our opponent today, beat Creighton at Creighton, 15th ranked in the nation. Creighton, number 2 in the Big East, sort of the second behind Villanova, and a team that's looked really good and a strong. Many people are talking about Creighton as a team that can make a deep run in the tournament. Georgetown comes into town and notches what can only be considered a signature program win for Patrick Ewing. Number 16, Virginia Tech, fresh off a win against UVA, loses to Pitt. 22nd ranked Florida loses to South Carolina. This is all on Wednesday night. There were 7 ranked teams that played on Wednesday night. No ranked versus ranked matchups. 5 of those 7 ranked teams lost to unranked teams. So it was an absolutely crazy night in college basketball. Checking in on the rest of the week, you had Ohio State, number 7, beating number 8 Iowa in a great Big Ten matchup on Thursday night. This game sort of further exposed flaws in the Iowa defensive game plan. Iowa's defense leaving something to be desired. So even though they score points like an absolute juggernaut, others, including and most recently Ohio State, have sort of exposed those defensive flaws. Ohio State putting up just shy of 90 points to go ahead and beat Iowa at Iowa. And this is further catapulting this Ohio State team into the Final Four conversation. Again, this is a great year for conferences like the Big Ten and the Big 12, but particularly the Big Ten. Ohio State has sort of emerged as one of the kind of the elite teams coming out of the Big Ten. And again, you hear a lot more talk recently about this Ohio State team being able to make a deep run, possibly being in that Final Four conversation. So before we get into some Big East, we're going to talk a little bit about the Saturday notables. Number 6 ranked Texas lost at Oklahoma State, which I believe caps off a tough week for them. Number 19 Missouri edged out number 10 Alabama yesterday. Worth noting that these were the 2 ranked teams that played on Wednesday that had won. So just sort of coincidental that they then play each other, leading to a loss there. So there's a lot of mayhem with losses in the top 25 this week. Expect the new rankings when they come out to look precipitously different than they did before. Ooh, that's a big word. And then yesterday for a game that I was personally excited for, but didn't really live up to the hype. Number 12 Illinois handled number 19 Wisconsin pretty easily, really for most of the game. Checking in there towards the end of the first half, Illinois was already up double digits, and they pretty much cruised for the whole game. Number 17, West Virginia beat number 23, Kansas yesterday. And then finally, to sort of round out your notables across the top of college basketball, number 21, UCLA lost to unranked but strong conference opponent USC. So again, a really crazy week around the top 25 in college basketball. And when you hone in on the Big East specifically, I think the team that probably deserves the most mention besides St. John's, which we'll get to in a moment, is going to be Seton Hall, who stays in the bubble coming off of their second loss to Villanova. They have definitely done a good job to stay right on that bubble with wins both at Providence on Wednesday night and then again at UConn yesterday. As I mentioned earlier, Georgetown won in Omaha earlier this week, beating 15th ranked Creighton, in what is statistically Patrick Ewing's biggest program win so far as the Georgetown coach. And then Creighton came right back and avenged that Georgetown loss by narrowly defeating Marquette on the road in Milwaukee yesterday. So a lot of moving and shaking going on. And then finally, I think obviously the most honorable mention in the Big East has got to go to this St. John's team, who kept rolling, not only with a huge, one of their biggest wins in years, maybe decades, against Villanova. Actually, that's not true. They did beat Villanova a few years ago when Villanova was ranked number 1. However, this was such a catapulting win because they had been surging. They really, a couple weeks ago, they weren't really on anybody's radar. Now they are firmly on the bubble and almost playing their way in. Because they kept rolling, not only beating Villanova this week, but then they also scored 92 points en route to a W at Providence yesterday. So, between that and Providence's earlier loss in the week to Seton Hall, Providence is now on the outer rims of the NCAA tournament bubble, if really at all. And St. John's is so hot and can stay hot with a game at Butler coming up. Obviously Butler sort of carrying that bottom tier of the Big East. So St. John's can keep it rolling if they can notch that road W. I believe they have Xavier after that, which is a good contest for them. Then they have DePaul after that before an eventual rematch with Villanova. So there is absolutely a chance that St. John's can stay surging right on into that second matchup with Villanova, at which point they probably will have played themselves into the NCAA tournament field if they're able to do that. But as we know from looking at the Big East schedule night in and night out, nothing is certainty. So just as easily as they could win at Butler, against Xavier, and at DePaul, they could just as easily lose all three. Who knows? So you don't want to predict the future here, but this St. John's team is looking good. So looking at the clock here, we've got about 13 minutes left until tip-off. Again, I'm just so excited that we have this Nova game to sort of bring us right up into the Super Bowl timeframe. Game's going to probably end somewhere around 2 hours before kickoff of the Super Bowl. So it gives us a perfect amount of time to sort of reset and get the menus ready, get the houses ready. Hopefully nobody out there, especially none of you watching, are having any sort of Super Bowl parties or large gatherings, unless everybody in that gathering has been properly vaccinated, which I highly suspect at this point because our country's having a tough time with that. I digress. So I digress as we, an unorthodox Super Bowl Sunday. So having a Villanova game is certainly a gift. But what wasn't a gift for Villanova fans was what we saw on Wednesday night in the Villanova-St. John's game. So as many of you are brutally well aware, Villanova lost this game 70-59 against the St. John's team, who played a nearly perfect game, pretty much according to the exact script and game plan that all of the media coverage suggested was going to happen. They played the exact game plan that we talked about on this show prior to the game. And Villanova played arguably their worst game of the year, and maybe not even arguably. They really just did not play well. This is definitely going to be a hot take. I believe sports media was really quick to herald St. John's for sort of causing the mayhem, and certainly need to objectively credit this St. John's team for a really great win. However, I would contest that many of Villanova's issues, especially in the first half, were mostly self-inflicted. A lot of their early turnovers were not created by pressure. We saw bad passes. We saw balls being bounced off of the foot. We saw Colin Gillespie's worst game of the year by far, maybe the worst game we've seen from him in a Villanova uniform. Again, we're normally very reliable ball handling. We saw the ball just kind of going everywhere and almost unforced there for most of the first half. Then I think once they got down, St. John's settled into their sort of mayhem press, they definitely caused issues there, and give credit where credit is due. But I think Nova sort of self-inflicted their way down this path to start. In addition to the turnovers, the shooting was abysmal. It was one of the worst shooting nights we've seen from Villanova this year. They shot 32% overall from the field and 27% from three. They got plenty of open looks. The defense was not in their face. I think you can definitely credit St. John's for playing better defensively than their average, not being known as a great defensive team other than the turnovers. But Nova was just missing shots. Not only were they missing open shots, they were missing capitalizing on the transition buckets that many predicted they would have, but they weren't really pushing the throttle. I think it was because they didn't want to feed into like that speed of gameplay, and so they were not taking advantage of transition shots, pulling the ball back out to try and run a set offense, and then they were just missing the open shots. So again, this game, everything went according to plan for St. John's. Things couldn't have gone worse for Villanova, and you had a rough night from most of the guys. To be completely honest, you have to love Villanova in a rematch between these two teams where you're not going to catch Villanova playing that poor again. Highly unlikely that I can expect St. John's would play that nearly perfect again. So you got to have the circle on the calendar there for February 23rd for this rematch, and I love the Cats there. Checking in on some individual players. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl had a monster game on the stat sheet with 14 points and 17 rebounds. But I would say the eye test for most of the game was that nobody, including Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, was really able to step up and lead a comeback, obviously, because the team lost by double digits. But I did receive a text from multiple people at points during the game saying, JRE is a total no-show on the offensive end. He did end up with 14 points. And I don't want to single him out because I think of everybody on the team, he probably had the best overall game, but still, weren't able to see anybody sort of step up and take over. I already mentioned Colin Gillespie had, his worst game in years, maybe ever in a Cats uniform. I was reminding myself, and I would remind you all, we've seen so many great and gritty moments from Colin Gillespie. We can certainly let him off the hook for one off night. One thing I'm really excited for in today's game is sort of like a mini revenge game. Think back to that first Georgetown game of the year when we were down 18 points. It was Colin Gillespie that had that sort of that determination, that attitude that surged us right back, and he played pretty nasty from late in the first half throughout the rest of the game. So coming off of his worst game, a guy with the mental fortitude that Colin Gillespie is reported to have, I really love what I'm expecting to see from him today. In the St. John's game, I had his stat line queued up. I'm not even going to read it off because it's behind us. It's behind him. And I guarantee you a player of his caliber has a short memory, the memory of an elephant. Honorable mention. We're going to give honorable mention to Caleb Daniels and Eric Dixon, who both had individually strong performances, especially compared to their averages. So kudos to them. I think if we had seen any one of the other starters besides Caleb Daniels be able to play a decent game, this might have been a very different outcome. But you saw, as we've already discussed, you saw a subpar game from Colin Gillespie. You saw a subpar game from Justin Moore, an almost non-existent game from Jermaine Samuels. And Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, I would say, had obviously a very strong game if you look at the stat sheet, but I would say about an average game from an overall performance perspective. So in summary, this was definitely a good loss to take in early February. The attitude of the team seemed like it was missing late, which is something a little bit surprising. You don't really see from this team, but this team also isn't used to having being playing from behind late. So this is the exact type of scenario you want to get out of the way in early February because there's a lot on tape to learn from this. So I would expect the next time, if we do happen to see Villanova in this situation again, you're going to see a little bit more chin up, a little bit more positive attitude, and a little bit more fight. Now that they've sort of been in this situation. The only cause for concern is that this team is so consistent and so deep throughout its starting lineup. When there's nobody really in a position to be able to sort of step up and take that leadership role, it can be a little confusing. It's like, hey, who's going to step up? And then nobody did. So it's something you want to see them prepare for as we get into the later stages of February and into March, where you have to be a little bit more comfortable coming from behind and not just like throwing up your hands and say, hey, this game got away from us. Let's move on to the next one. So checking in on the time here, we got about 5 minutes left. So let's talk a little bit about Georgetown. Georgetown had lost 5 straight and 6 out of 7 overall in the Big East before a recent 3-week layoff due to COVID issues within the program. That COVID layoff seems to have breathed new life into the Georgetown team, as since coming back from that layoff, they notched first a very close win, a 1-point win against Providence, and then most recently commanding the win we previously discussed at number 15 Creighton earlier this week. So is this Georgetown team playing their way into the bubble? Highly unlikely. For this Georgetown team to get into the tournament, you're probably looking at, either A, winning out and beating the likes of Villanova, as well as, possibly getting, Big East tournament. Probably pretty unlikely for this team. But what we are seeing is that they are capable of beating anybody in the Big East on any given night. They had Nova on the ropes in the first matchup, so this game should not be taken lightly. But you like Villanova coming off of sort of an ugly game on Wednesday night to come in sort of prepared and ready to play and ready to respect any opponent because they have to take care of business. Looking back on our analysis for that first game between Nova and Georgetown, the players to watch for Georgetown remain the exact same. So you've got senior guard Javon Blair averaging almost 18 points. He's sort of the identity of the offense of this team. He had a particularly good game against Creighton in their win earlier this week. Worth noting, Villanova did do a decent job of holding him, I think, to 11 points in their first matchup. So we'll see if Nova can again sort of keep him on lockdown. The other senior to call out is going to be senior forward Jamarco Pickett. He's the other senior leader of the team. He's averaging just shy of 12 points per game and over 8 rebounds a game. So having a very formidable senior season there. And then finally, the last name you're going to want to call out, you're going to want to pay attention to, is going to be their sophomore center, Qudus Wahab, who is very similar stat sheet to Jamarco Pickett, averaging just shy of 12 per game, 12 points, averaging just right around 8 rebounds a game, and causing that sort of inside disturbance for this Georgetown team to be able to play a little bit bigger when it needs to. So as we've discussed, I'm not going to go into too much detail on the first matchup between these teams, but Georgetown shot the absolute lights out in the first half of this game. And we saw some of Nova's worst playing in the first half of that game. And then somewhere, I want to say, with a few minutes left in that first half, the Villanova team got off the bus, turned the lights on, and from then on, it was almost an easy victory in the second half, with the Cats winning by 13 in a game that they once trailed by 18. So that's a pretty massive swing. And then got the Cats off and running to a really hot start in the Big East overall. So it'll be exciting to watch these teams come back together today. Georgetown riding high off of their win at Creighton. It would be a super tall order to go in and win at Creighton and then win at Villanova, but you can't put it past anybody in this Big East with the way we've seen some really unpredictable wins this year so far. So what are we looking for in today's game? With 2 minutes left, a couple of keys to look for. Number one, as you've heard me say over and over, you have to like Nova coming in for a bounce back game overall, sort of a quote unquote revenge game of sorts, particularly honing in on Colin Gillespie and Justin Moore. Also worth calling out that Moore didn't have a great night against Georgetown in the first matchup. So sort of in that, that vein of he's too good to have a poor game against the same team twice narrative that we've played with others on this team. Look for Justin Moore in that context today. Very similar. I'm going to call that out. Same thing for Jeremiah Robinson Earl. We tested this narrative a few games ago. He's not going to have a bad game against the same team twice. And he didn't have a great first game against Georgetown. So you see a lot of things sort of brewing where you've got guys that are due. You've got Gillespie coming off of his worst performance of the year. You've got Moore and Jeremiah Robinson Earl having, lackluster first games against Georgetown. Love the Cats to come in determined today, and which is exactly what we would love to see as we are 1 minute away from tip-off. As promised, we're getting into the Super Bowl menu. The Super Bowl menu for today is, it's just going to be my wife and I. We have another couple coming over, so there'll be 4 of us in our sort of little Super Bowl pod. We have a monster charcuterie board with a nice assortment of salamis. We've got a burrata cheese. We've got a feta cheese. I believe we've got a goat cheddar for all you fancy pants magoos out there. And then we have the main items are going to be pigs in a blanket with an everything bagel seasoning. And we have like a little wing station going on. We're going to do a couple different types of wings, some baked, some done in the air fryer. And then finally, we're going to cap it off with a nice salad, nice arugula salad with some feta cheese, some cherry tomatoes, and a light Italian vinaigrette. Fun fact, that was my nickname in high school, light Italian vinaigrette. Just kidding, that wasn't, but I thought that was funny. Getting back into, we're at 1:30, so it's Nova tip time, baby. We're all excited to see the Cats in a bounce back game today. I expect to see a Cats bounce back W here at home against Georgetown. But for now, this is where I leave you. Enjoy the game. Enjoy the Super Bowl tonight, including Villanova football alum Tano Passignon playing for the Chiefs at defensive end. So I guess we're going to say go Chiefs and have a great Sunday, everybody. Go Nova.